Welcome to Shattered Ties, where trust is broken, loyalties are tested, and hidden betrayals come to light. Here, we uncover the darkest sides of family, friendship, and love, stories of deception, greed, revenge, and the quiet pursuit of justice. So sit back, listen closely, and step into a world where every shattered bond leaves a scar. His wife had been dead for 15 years before she spoke to him again. Not in the way of grief, not the involuntary hearing of a voice. In a quiet house, not the dream presence that diminished year by year, until you woke and couldn't quite reconstruct the sound of it. In the way of a letter, in the way of her handwriting, on a cream envelope, in a storage box in an attic, on a Saturday afternoon in October. Addressed to him, sealed, and dated for a day that had passed 15 years ago. Without the letters ever arriving, he stood in the attic, with dust on his hands, and his daughter's voice somewhere behind him, and the particular stillness of a man who has just understood that the worst thing he'd ever lived through was not, perhaps, the whole story. The attic had been Emma's idea. She'd been asking for 2 years, gently, the specific gentleness of a daughter who understood that her father's relationship with the objects in this house was more complicated than the objects themselves, and he'd been finding reasons to defer for 2 years. And then one Saturday in October, she'd arrived with coffee and a particular expression that communicated she was not leaving without at least a start. And he had found that morning that he didn't have the energy to find another reason. So they'd gone up together. The attic of the house on Whitmore Street had the specific quality of spaces that had absorbed a family's history without anyone deciding what to do with it. Boxes stacked without system, furniture that had outlasted its usefulness but not the difficulty of disposing of it, the accumulated drift of 3 decades of a life lived in these rooms. Rachel's things were at the back. He'd put them there in the months after, not throwing away, not keeping accessible, the specific compromise of someone who understood that neither choice was actually available to him yet. That was 15 years ago. He'd been up here a handful of times since. Never for long. Emma was working through boxes near the front, making the keep-donate decisions with the practical efficiency of someone young enough not to have a complicated relationship with objects. He worked toward the back. He moved slowly. He opened a box and found the wedding albums, 3 of them matching burgundy, Rachel's choice, and sat with them on an upturned crate for 20 minutes without opening them. He didn't need to open them. He remembered the photographs, the specific quality of that afternoon, May 25 years ago this year. A garden ceremony in her parents' backyard was not something that required the album to access. He put the albums aside in the keep pile. He moved to the next box. The box had Rachel's handwriting on the side, not a label, her writing in black marker, her handwriting that he recognized, the way you recognized things that had been part of your daily life for long enough to become invisible, only visible now, in their absence. MISC, personal. Doctor. He opened it. Photographs, loose, the ones that had never made it into albums, the casual record of ordinary days, a birthday card he recognized as his 40th, a small velvet box containing her mother's earrings, which he'd forgotten existed. Then, at the bottom of the box, beneath a layer of tissue paper that had yellowed with the years, a cream envelope. He picked it up. His name, her handwriting, Daniel, and below that, in the same hand, the instruction, open on our 25th anniversary. He looked at the envelope. For a long time, their 25th anniversary had been 3 years ago. He had spent it at the cemetery on Elm Hill, the same way he'd spent every anniversary since the accident, with a card he'd written the night before, and a bunch of flowers from the shop on the corner, and an hour's sitting beside her headstone in whatever weathers October had decided to offer. He had not spent it opening a letter because he hadn't known the letter existed. Dad. Emma's voice from the front of the attic. He looked at the envelope in his hands. Just a minute, he said. He sat with it. He thought about Rachel's handwriting, the specific loops of it, the way she'd always written his name, the slightly elongated D. He'd watched her write on 1,000 things, birthday cards, grocery lists, the notes she left on the kitchen counter when she went out early, and wanted him to know She'd thought of him. Before she left, he thought about the last time he'd seen her handwriting, in the months after she died, the cards she'd prepared in advance for Emma's upcoming birthdays, years worth of them, that he'd found in her desk drawer and had not been able to throw away, and had stored somewhere, and had eventually stopped being able to find. He thought about a woman who had prepared for her own absence, with the specific, heartbreaking practicality of someone who had been given enough warning to do something. With the warning, he thought about this envelope, addressed, sealed, dated, prepared for an anniversary. That was when she wrote it, still years away. He thought about the word hidden. He hadn't let himself use that word yet. The envelope had been in a box. Boxes ended up in attics. There were explanations. He sat with the explanations. He sat with the envelope. He put it in his jacket pocket. He went back to work. He didn't open it that afternoon. He helped Emma carry boxes down the attic stairs. The ones marked for donation. The ones marked for storage. The wedding albums that were going back inside, where they'd always been. Emma made dinner. He sat at the kitchen table and watched her move through the room. That had been Rachel's room first. The specific movements of a woman's who'd grown up watching another woman's move through it, and felt as he often felt, watching his daughter, the particular complexity of loving someone who was the evidence of something you'd lost. After dinner, Emma looked at him. "You okay?" she said. "Long day," he said. She looked at him the way she'd been looking at him for 27 years, with her mother's eyes, which she'd always had, which he'd never entirely learned not to feel when they were directed at him. "I found some things up there," he said. "I need some time with them." She nodded. She didn't ask. Emma had always understood, had learned young, in the way children learn things, when the alternative was not learning them, the shape of her father's silences, and which ones needed company, and which ones needed room. She left at 9. He sat at the kitchen table. After the door closed, he took the envelope out of his jacket pocket. He set it on the table. He looked at it for a long time. He made tea. He brought it to the table. He sat down. He picked up the envelope, cream, slightly ivory with age, still sealed, the glue of it still holding, after 15 years. And he held it, and thought about her, not the grief of her. The grief had become, over 15 years, a structural feature of his interior life, present and load-bearing, but no longer acute. But her specifically, Rachel Harper, née Wallace, 43 years old, when she died, the person who had written his name on this envelope, and sealed it, and written the instruction, and put it somewhere. She believed he would find it. He thought about what it meant that he was finding it now, instead of 3 years ago. He thought about the instruction, open on our 25th anniversary. He thought about 3 years ago, a card on a headstone, flowers from the corner shop, an hour in whatever weather, and what it would have meant to have had this then, what it would have meant to have had it at all. He opened the envelope. The letter was handwritten, 2 pages, front and back, her handwriting in blue ink, slightly smaller than her everyday writing, the handwriting of someone concentrating, choosing words. He read the date. At the top, October 3rd, the year of the accident, 7 weeks before she died. He put the letter on the table. He breathed. He picked it up again. He read the first line. "Daniels, if you're reading this, your mother probably tried to stop it." He put the letter down. He looked at the walls of the kitchen. That had been their kitchen for 23 years. He looked at the table where they'd had 1,000 breakfasts. He looked at his hands, 58 years old, the hands of a man who had been in this house for all of those years, and had believed, for 15 of them, that he understood what had happened in it. He thought about his mother, Evelyn Harper, 79 years old, who called every Sunday, who had been present for every significant event of his life, who had been there in the weeks after Rachel died, present, helpful, the indispensable mother of a grieving son, who had been in this house, who had access to this house, who had been in the months between Rachel's death and the first time Daniel had gone through Rachel's things, the months of grief in which he hadn't been able to go through anything, who had been here. He read the first line again. "If you're reading this, your mother probably tried to stop it." He looked at the date on the letter, 7 weeks before Rachel died. Rachel, who had been sick, who had known she was sick, who had written a letter to be opened on their anniversary, and had hidden it in a box in a storage room, with the specific care of someone who understood that the obvious place was not the safe place. He thought about the obvious places, the desk, the bedside table, the places a letter would naturally be kept. He thought about whether those places had been gone through. He thought about who had been in this house. He picked up the letter. He turned to the second line. He kept reading. Outside, the October night settled around the house. On Whitmore Street, the same house, the same street, the same neighborhood. That had been the entire geography of his life for 23 years. And inside it, a man sat at a kitchen table and read his dead wife's words for the first time and understood with the specific clarity of something that couldn't be unclarified. That 15 years ago, he had not lost one thing. He had lost two, and the second one had been taken. He read the letter 3 times that night, the first time straight through, absorbing the shape of it, the sequence, the specific Rachelness of how she organized information, chronologically, without self-pity, with the precision of someone who had been a high school English teacher and had spent 20 years believing that clear sentences were a form of respect for the person reading them. The second time slowly, pausing at the passages that required pausing, sitting with the ones that his brain needed more than one pass to accept. The third time, with a notepad beside him, not taking notes exactly, more the instinct of someone who understood that the letter contained more than it was saying, and that the more's was what he needed. Rachel began with an apology. This was so like her, so precisely, specifically her, that it stopped him. The first time, before he'd gotten 3 lines in, she apologized for not telling him. I've wanted to tell you so many times, she wrote. I've started that conversation in my head 100 different ways. The problem is that every version ends with you in the middle, between me and your mother, and I could never find a version where that was fair to you. He sat with that sentence. He thought about 22 years of marriage, the specific geography of it, the places where Evelyn had been present, and the places where she had been present, in ways that he'd felt, but hadn't named. He thought about the arguments he and Rachel had had, the ones that had seemed, at the time, to be about the specific thing they were arguing about, the vacation that got redirected, the house decisions that somehow always involved a third opinion, the parenting disagreements that had always seemed to resolve in the direction of what Evelyn thought, rather than what they'd decided. He'd attributed these to the ordinary friction of a marriage that included extended family, the compromise and accommodation of people who were trying to love each other across the complicating fact of other loyalties. He had not, apparently, been seeing what Rachel saw. Your mother decided she didn't like me, Rachel wrote. About 3 months after we got engaged. I don't know exactly what I did. I've spent 20 years trying to figure it out, but I remember the specific moment. Something shifted. We were planning the wedding. I wanted the garden ceremony. Your mother wanted the church. I'd told you first, which was a mistake. I understand now, because she interpreted it as me going around her. And after that, something changed in her eyes. When she looked at me, she was never cruel. I want to be fair about that. She was never the kind of mother-in-law that people complained about openly. She was subtle. She was patient. She had a gift for doing things that felt in isolation, like nothing. A comment, a timing, a preference expressed at exactly the right moment. And that accumulated over years into something that felt like a systematic effort to make me feel like a guest in my own marriage. He looked up from the letter. He looked at the kitchen, the room that had been Rachel's, more than any other room, the room where she'd spent Sunday mornings and Wednesday evenings, and the ordinary hours that made up most of a life. He thought about how many times his mother had sat at this table. He thought about Rachel's face across the years, the specific quality of her expression at family gatherings, at holiday dinners, in the aftermath of his mother's visits, an expression he'd read as introversion, as tiredness, as the particular toll that social events took on someone who processed them inward. He was recategorizing now. I need to tell you something, Rachel wrote. that I should have told you years ago. But I was afraid of what it would cost you. I was afraid of what it would cost us. And then I got sick, and the fear changed shape, became less about cost, and more about time. And I realized that the thing I'd been protecting you from was actually something you needed to know. The letter shifted tone here. He felt it. The movement from the careful accounting of grievances to something more urgent, more specific. Your father set up a trust for Emma. He stopped. He read the line again. His father, Gerald Harper, who had died 12 years ago, 8 years into Daniel's marriage. A good and quiet man who had loved Rachel openly and Emma extravagantly, had set up a trust for Emma. He had not known this. He told me about it. About a year before he died *. Rachel wrote. He didn't tell Evelyn. He said he wanted it to be between him and me, that it was for Emma's future, and he trusted me with it. He said he'd made arrangements with his attorney, and that I should keep the documentation safe. He sat with this, his father, careful, methodical Gerald, who had set up a trust for his granddaughter and had chosen to tell Rachel, not Evelyn. Rachel, I kept the documents *. She wrote. I kept them very carefully. And then about 4 months before this letter, so about a year ago, if you're reading this, when you're supposed to, I started checking on the account, routinely, just to see. Daniel, just his name, on its own line, the specific use of his name, the way she used it, when she needed him to pay full attention. The money is gone. He put the letter down. He sat in the kitchen at 11:30 at night and looked at the wall. He thought about Emma, 27 years old, who had grown up in this house, who had lost her mother at 12, who had turned out so completely and so well that he still, sometimes, felt he couldn't account for it. He thought about his father, who had loved Emma with a specific, undisguised joy. That had been one of the things Daniel had loved most about his father. He thought about a trust. He thought about the money being gone. He thought about who had access. He picked up the letter. I've left the documentation in a place your mother doesn't know about *. Rachel wrote. I'll leave you instructions. The instructions were in the letter's final paragraphs. Not obvious, Rachel had understood clearly that the letter itself might not be safe, that if someone found the letter, they would find the instructions, and so she'd written them in the oblique language of someone who trusted that the right reader would understand and the wrong reader wouldn't. She referenced a book, a specific novel, a title she'd given him on their 3rd anniversary, the copy of which was on the shelf in the study, 3rd row from the top, left side. She referenced a conversation they'd had on their first trip to Italy, the hotel, the city, the evening she'd described as one of the best of her life. He understood the code in approximately 4 minutes, not because he was particularly clever, but because he knew Rachel, had known her for 22 years, and the code was built from the specific material of their shared life in a way that only the person who had lived it beside her would recognize. He went to the study, 3rd row left side, middle mark the copy, with the inscription, for the man who makes me feel like I have time for this. He took it off the shelf. He fanned the pages. A folded piece of paper fell out from approximately page 340. He picked it up. He unfolded it. Rachel's handwriting, shorter this time. A list, a bank he recognized, an account number, a name, his father's attorney, and a note. The attorney has copies. His number is in my address book *, under F for Franklin. He found the address book in Rachel's desk, still where she'd left it, 15 years undisturbed, because he hadn't been able to move anything in that desk, and found Franklin James. On the 3rd page, he wrote the number down. He sat at Rachel's desk, in Rachel's study, at midnight on a Saturday in October, and held the piece of paper in his hands. He looked around the room, the books, the desk, the photograph on the corner, the 3 of them, at Emma's 3rd birthday party, Rachel laughing at something, off camera, Emma's face entirely caked. He thought about Rachel, sitting at this desk, sick, afraid, running out of time, hiding documents in novels, writing letters for anniversaries that might or might not come, trying to arrange the truth into something that would survive her. He thought about what that must have cost her, not the effort, the decision to spend the last months of her life managing the aftermaths of a betrayal. Instead of simply living what was left, he closed the address book. He went back to the kitchen. He called Emma. She answered on the second ring. She'd always been a light sleeper. Another thing she'd inherited from Rachel. "Dad, it's midnight." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry. I need to tell you something. And I need you to come over tomorrow morning." A pause. "Are you okay?" He looked at the letters on the kitchen table, at the piece of paper beside it, at the notepad with the attorney's name and numbers. "I've been better," he said honestly, "but I'm okay. Come in the morning. Bring coffee." "Dad, I found something in the attic today," he said. "From your mother." The line was quiet for a moment. When Emma spoke again, her voice had changed, the sleep edge gone, replaced by the specific, full presence attentiveness she deployed when something mattered. "I'll be there at 8, she said. He thanked her. He ended the call. He sat at the table. He read the letters one more time, the fourth time, the last time that night, and let himself feel, in the specific privacy of a kitchen, at midnight, what it meant to hear his wife's voice for the first time in 15 years, and have it say, "I tried to protect you. I tried to protect Emma. I ran out of time, but I left you everything I found. Find it." He turned off the kitchen light. He went to the window. For a moment, the street outside, the neighborhood, the October darkness, sitting quietly over everything. He thought about Rachel, looking out this window. He thought about his mother, sitting at this table. He thought about the distance between those two images, the space between them, the years between them, and what had been happening in that space, in those years, that he hadn't seen. He went to bed. He didn't sleep for a long time, but when he finally did, it was with the piece of paper on the nightstand, the attorney's name, the account number, the evidence of his wife, reaching across 15 years to hand him something she'd carried alone, and the specific, complicated feeling of a man who had been loved very carefully by someone who hadn't been able to tell him all of it while she was still here, but had found a way to tell him anyway. James Franklin was 81 years old and had been a trusts and estates attorney for 53 years, long enough to have handled Gerald Harper's affairs across 2 decades, long enough to have been waiting with the specific patience of an old man who had seen many things and understood that some of them took time to surface. For a call that came on a Sunday morning in October. "I wondered when you'd call," he said, when Daniel identified himself. Daniel held the phone. "You knew," he said. "I knew your father's wishes," Franklin said carefully. "I knew the trust existed. I've known for some years that something had gone wrong with it. What I didn't know, what I couldn't know, without being contacted, was whether you knew." "I didn't know," Daniel said. "No," Franklin said. "I suspected you didn't." A pause. "Can you come in Monday?" Franklin said. "Bring your daughter. There are things you should hear together." Franklin's office was in a building in the West Loop, the kind of building that had been there since before the neighborhood was called the West Loop. Dark wood and brass fixtures, the accumulated presence of decades of serious work. He and Emma sat across from Franklin at a table that had probably held harder conversations than this one and had survived them all. Franklin had a file folder. He opened it. He slid a document across the table. A trust agreement, Gerald Harper's signature. At the bottom, dated 12 years ago, the year before he died. "Your father established a discretionary trust for your daughter Emma," Franklin said. The initial funding was $340,000, a combination of savings, liquidated investments, and the proceeds from the sale of a property he owned separately from the family home. Emma looked at the document. Daniel looked at Emma. She was reading carefully. Her mother's habit, the careful reading of someone who understood that documents contained more than their surface, and her face held the specific expression of someone receiving information they had no prepared response for. "He never told me," she said quietly. "He told your mother," Franklin said. "He trusted her with the documentation. He asked her to ensure the trust passed to you when you turned 30. Emma looked at Daniel. 3 years from now, she said. "Yes," Franklin said. He slid a second document across the table. "Account statements, 12 years of them, tabbed and organized. The careful assembly of a man who had been watching and documenting and waiting. Daniel picked up the first page. The initial balance, $340,000. He turned to the most recent. Current balance, $0. He looked at the withdrawal history, the middle section of the file. The pages Franklin had organized in chronological order. Not one withdrawal, not a single large transaction that could be called a theft, and dealt with 47 withdrawals over 11 years, ranging from $2,000 to $18,000. Small enough, most of them, to avoid automatic flags, frequent enough to accumulate into the entire fund, spread across 11 years of consistent, patient, incremental removal. The work of someone who understood that large crimes were noticed and small ones weren't, who had access. Emma said. Her voice was even, the evenness of someone managing something carefully. Franklin looked at her. Your grandmother, he said. Evelyn Harper's was named co-trustee. Your grandfather's trusted her to administer the fund in Rachel's absence, to serve as a backup in the event that Rachel was unavailable. The room was quiet. He didn't anticipate, Franklin said carefully, that Rachel would predecease him so significantly. He also didn't anticipate. He stopped. He looked at Daniel. He trusted his wife, Franklin said. As people do. Daniel looked at the withdrawal history. 47 transactions. 11 years. He thought about Emma's 30th birthday, 3 years from now, and what it would have looked like if he hadn't found the letter. Emma receiving a document from a trust she'd never been told about. Opening an account that should have held $340,000 plus interest. Finding zero. Being told. By whom? By Evelyn. By no one. Because Evelyn would have simply not mentioned it and waited for the matters to expire quietly. That there was nothing left. He thought about Rachel. Discovering this, he thought about Rachel. Already sick, already afraid, sitting at the desk, in the study, with these same documents, understanding what had happened, and understanding who had done it, and understanding that she was running out of time to do anything about it. He put the document down. Can we recover it? Emma said. That will depend, Franklin said, on what steps are taken. There are legal avenues. The documentation is strong. Your grandmother is still alive, which complicates and also simplifies things in different directions. He looked at Daniel. I've been keeping these records, Franklin said, for 11 years, waiting for someone to ask for them. Daniel looked at him. Why didn't you come forward? He said. Franklin was quiet. For a moment, I had no standing to act without a request from the beneficiary's guardian or from the beneficiary herself. I had obligations of confidentiality. And he paused. And I was not certain, for a time, whether you knew, whether it was possible, that this was happening. With your knowledge. Daniel looked at the table. It wasn't, he said. I know that now, Franklin said. I suspected it then, but suspicion isn't standing. He closed the folder. Take the copies I've made. Review them. Get your own attorney. Then decide what you want to do. He looked at Emma. Your grandfather's wanted you to have this. He worked for it, and saved it, and structured it carefully, because he loved you very much. Emma looked at the folder in her hands. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. He finished reading the letter that evening. He'd been reading it in sections, not because it was long, but because some parts of it needed to be read, and then set down and lived with before he could move to the next part. He read the final section at the kitchen table. After Emma had gone home, she'd left with the copies, with the attorney's number, with the specific determined expression of a woman's who had decided that something needed to be done and was preparing to do it. And he read the pages Rachel had written about the last months. By the time I found this, she wrote, I already knew I was sick, not suspected and knew. The diagnosis was confirmed about 3 weeks before I started writing this letter. I mention it because I need you to understand why I'm writing it this way, why I'm telling you in a letter, instead of sitting across from you and telling you directly. I thought about telling you directly. I rehearsed it. I know exactly what you would have done. You would have gone to your mother immediately and your mother would have denied it. And it would have become a battle between the two of you, that I was too tired by then to help you fight. I didn't have the energy for the right fight. Daniel, I only had enough left for the right record. He looked at the window. He thought about the months before she died, what he remembered of them, the version he'd lived. Rachel had been sick. The diagnosis had come, and they had dealt with it. The appointments, the treatment, the specific way. She had approached her own illness with the same clear-eyed practicality. She brought to everything, one thing at a time. No catastrophizing. Deal with what's in front of you. He had been present for all of it. He had believed. He had been present for all of it. He had not known that inside the appointments, and the treatment, and the practical management of her own dying, she had also been sitting at her desk, late at night, hiding documents in novels, and writing a letter to an anniversary she might not survive to see. I need to tell you something else, asterisk. She wrote, the letter I'm writing, I'm going to seal it and put it with the box of things I'm leaving in the attic. I'm going to write the instruction on the outside, but I'm not certain it will stay there. Your mother has been in our house many times in the last few months. I've watched her, the way she moves through rooms, the specific attention she pays to things. She's been looking for something. I don't know if she found it. I put it somewhere I believe she doesn't know about, but I'm not certain. If you find this letter on our anniversary, on any of our anniversaries, then she didn't stop it, or she tried and failed. If you find it much later than that, then she found it first. He put the letter down. He thought about much later. He thought about 3 years, past the 25th anniversary. He thought about his mother, in this house, in the weeks after Rachel died, present, helpful, going through things, organizing, managing, the indispensable mother of a man who was incapable of managing anything. He thought about how grateful he had been for her presence. He thought about what that presence had cost him. He thought about a letter that had been sealed with the intention of arriving on an anniversary and had instead spent 15 years in a box in an attic. He thought about a woman of 79 who had been calling him every Sunday for 15 years, who had sat at this table, who had asked about Emma, who had attended Rachel's memorial and had cried with what had appeared to be genuine grief, who had been in this house, in these rooms, 15 years ago, going through things. He stood up. He walked to the window. He looked at the street. He thought about Rachel, 43 years old, sick, afraid, running out of time, choosing how to spend what she had left, not on her illness, not on her grief, on this, on making sure that the truth survived her. I don't want you to be angry, she had written, near the end. That's not what this is for. I want you to know what happened. I want Emma to have what your father intended, and I want you to understand, whatever you find, whatever you decide to do with it, that the years we had were real. Your mother's behavior was real too. Both things were true at the same time, and I lived inside both of them for 22 years, and I would not trade one of them to be free of the other. I chose you. I would choose you again. I'm choosing you now, in the only way I still can, by making sure you have the truth. I love you. I'm sorry it took this long to reach you. Rachel. He stood at the window for a long time. After he finished reading, the street outside was exactly as it had always been. The same houses, the same trees, the October darkness, soft and indifferent. He thought about 15 years. He thought about every Sunday his mother had called. He thought about Emma, 27 years old, who had grown up without her mother, who had a grandfather who had loved her extravagantly and had tried to leave her something, who had been moved through her entire life with something missing that she hadn't known was missing. He thought about Rachel at her desk. He thought about what it meant to love someone in the face of everything that complicated the loving, to choose to protect them with the last of your energy, to arrange the truth like a letter addressed to a future you weren't sure you'd be there to see. He looked at the letter on the table. He looked at his phone. His mother's number was in it, under M, the way he'd always had it, the same number for 40 years. He looked at the number. He looked at the letter. He thought tomorrow he was going to need to be rested. For tomorrow, he turned off the kitchen light. He went upstairs. He lay in the dark and listened to the house, the specific sound of it, the creaks and settling of a building that had been standing for 30 years, and thought about Rachel, lying in the same dark, in this same house, 15 years ago, knowing what she knew, and choosing still to be here, to make it enough. He thought, she was braver than I ever understood. He thought, I'm going to spend the rest of my life understanding it. He slept. He drove to his mother's house. On Monday morning, he didn't call ahead. He'd thought about calling, had thought about it, the way you thought about the diplomatic version of a necessary thing, and had decided against it, for the simple reason that calling ahead would give her time to prepare a version, and he was done with versions. He wanted the face. Without the version, he parked in the driveway of the house in Oak Park, where he had grown up, the brick two-story, the garden that Evelyn had maintained with the devotion she gave to visible things, and sat for a moment. He thought about Rachel, driving somewhere, sitting in a parking lot, preparing herself for something difficult. He thought, I understand that now. He got out of the car. His mother answered the door. In her robe, 8:30 in the morning. She'd always been a late riser, and the expression on her face, when she saw him, was the expression he'd been looking for. Not surprise, something adjacent to surprise. The specific expression of someone who has been expecting a door and is performing the reaction to it. Not quite fast enough. Daniel, she said, I didn't know you were coming. I know, he said. She stepped back. He came inside. The house smelled the same. It always smelled the same. This house, the specific accumulation of his mother's choices, over 60 years of living in it. He sat at the kitchen table. She made coffee, the reflexive hospitality of a woman's who understood that coffee was a way of managing the shape of a conversation, of establishing who was hosting and who was being hosted. He let her make it. He waited. She sat across from him. She did not ask why he was there. That too told him something. I need to talk to you about Gerald's trust, he said. She picked up her coffee mug. She looked at it, rather than at him, the specific direction of someone making a calculation about what to confirm and what to let remain unconfirmed. Your father set up a trust for Emma, Daniel said. $340,000. I spoke to James Franklin on Sunday. His mother said nothing. The account is empty, he said. 47 withdrawals. 11 years. Franklin has records going back to the beginning. She looked up. Daniels, I'm not asking you to explain the withdrawals, he said. I have the records. I understand what happened. What I'm asking, what I want to understand, is why. She set the mug down. She looked at the table. He watched her face move through several things. The specific sequence of a person deciding which frame to put around what they're about to say. The money was sitting there, she said finally, doing nothing. Emma was 12. It was years before she'd ever see it. And there were things I needed. What things, he said. She looked at her hands. Your Uncle Thomas's debts, she said. Some of them came to me when he died. And then there was the situation with your cousin. The situation with Michael, he said. Michael, his cousin, Evelyn's favorite, the one who had needed things periodically over the years and had reliably found someone to provide them. I needed to help him, she said. He's family. Daniel looked at his mother. He thought about Emma, 12 years old, who had just lost her mother, whose grandfather had loved her and had tried to leave her something, and thought about that something being spent on Michael's problems. Emma is also family, he said. Emma had you. She said it quickly. Too quickly. The defensive speed of a preformed argument. Emma was going to be fine. She had you. The money was. It was sitting there. Accumulating. It was Emma's, he said. She was quiet. My father worked for it, he said. Saved it. Structured it carefully. He told Rachel about it, because he trusted Rachel to make sure Emma received it. He did not give you the co-trustee authority so that you could spend it. I would have paid it back, she said. The sentence landed in the kitchen, the way sentences landed, when they said, with complete precision, exactly the wrong thing. You were waiting for a chance to pay back $340,000, he said. In what scenario? She didn't answer. He looked at his mother, 79 years old, in her robe, at her kitchen table, and felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Not the clean hot rage he'd been carrying since the weekend, but the specific exhaustion of a man looking at something that had been true his entire life and was only now fully visible. She had always done this. Not the trust. The trust was specific. The trust was criminal, in ways that would need to be dealt with in their own time. But the principle of it, the belief that family resources existed to be allocated according to her judgment about who needed them most, the belief that her judgment was the final word. He had grown up inside that belief. Rachel had lived inside it for 22 years. I need to ask you something else, he said. She looked at him. The letter, he said. A silence. He watched her face. He'd been watching his mother's face his entire life, had learned to read it, the specific grammar of it, and what he saw now was not the blankness of someone who didn't know what he meant. It was the arrested expression of someone who had been hoping this question wouldn't come and had known, probably, for a long time, that it would. What letter? She said. He looked at her. Mom, he said. Just her name. The specific flatness of a person who was no longer going to participate in the pretending. She looked at the table. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I don't know what you think. I think you found it. He said, in the weeks after Rachel died, when you were here, going through things, helping me, I think you found it. And you read it. Because you would have read it. You would have needed to know what was in it. And then you kept it. For 15 years. The kitchen was very still. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed. His mother looked at her hands. And then, in a voice that was quieter than her usual voice, quieter and older, the voice of a woman, past the management of an image, she said, I couldn't let you see it. He looked at her. It was, she stopped, started again. She said things about me, things that weren't fair, things that would have. You were grieving. You were barely surviving. If you had read that, I had the right to read it. He said, it was addressed to me. Rachel wrote it for me. Whatever she said about you, whatever was in it, I had the right to read it. You would have hated me, she said. He looked at his mother. He thought about 15 years. He thought about the specific texture of those years, the grief, the managing, the gradual reconstruction of a life after Rachel. All of it conducted without the letter, without the truth, without the last thing his wife had wanted him to know. I might have, he said. She looked up. But it was mine to feel, he said. Not yours to protect me from. She was my wife. Whatever she had to tell me was mine to receive. You didn't have the right to decide otherwise. She put her hand over her mouth. It was, he noticed, the same gesture Emma had made in Franklin's office, the involuntary covering of a face that had run out of what to do with what was being said to it. He stood. He buttoned his jacket. He picked up his keys. I'm going to get an attorney, he said, about the trust Emma deserves. What her grandfathers intended for her. We'll work out what that looks like through the appropriate channels. He looked at his mother. As for the rest of it, the letters, 15 years, all of it, I need time. I don't know what I want to do with it yet. I don't know what there is to do with it. He paused. But I want you to know that I understand what you did, and that I need you to understand that you didn't protect me. You kept me from her for 15 years. You kept the last thing she wanted me to have. His mother was crying, quietly, without performance. The real thing. He looked at her tears and felt, alongside everything else, the complicated love of a son who was furious with someone he could not stop loving, and who understood by now that both of those things were going to be true for a very long time. I'll call, he said, when I'm ready. He left. He found the attachment. That afternoon, he hadn't been looking for it, or had been looking for it, without knowing it. The way you looked for the final piece of something, without consciously registering that something was incomplete. He was going through the box, from the attic again, the one with Rachel's things, the one that had held the envelope, looking at what was left, making sure he hadn't missed anything. At the bottom of the box, beneath the tissue paper, that had held the envelope was a small padded envelope, the kind used for electronics or small valuables, taped shut, with his name on it, in Rachel's handwriting. He hadn't seen it on Saturday. He didn't know if he'd missed it, or if the finding had needed to be in the right order. He opened it. Inside, a small digital voice recorder, the kind that had been common in the early 2000s, that teachers used, that Rachel had used for school planning. A recorder, his name on the envelope, from Rachel. He sat down. He held it for a long time, the specific weight of it, light and familiar, in the way of objects from a particular era, and understood that this was the final thing, the thing she had left after the letter, the thing that was there for him when the letters was no longer enough. He pressed play. Rachel's voice came out of the recorder and into the room and into 15 years of silence. And for the first time since the Saturday in the attic, he let himself cry. Her voice was the same. That was the first thing, the thing that hit him. Before the words, before anything she said, the simple, devastating fact that her voice was exactly as he remembered it, not the reconstructed version, the one he'd been maintaining in memory for 15 years, the version that had blurred at the edges, that he'd been afraid, sometimes, was losing its accuracy. But her voice, the actual acoustic fact of it, warm and slightly low, and with the specific rhythm she had when she was speaking carefully, thinking through what she was saying. As she said it, he sat in the kitchen chair and held the recorders and listened. Daniel, just his name first, the way she always started when she had something she needed him to hear. I don't know when you're going to find this. I don't know if you'll find the letter first or this first. I'm leaving them together, so probably the letter. But I recorded this because I wanted you to hear my voice, not just read my words. I know you. You'll need to hear it. He closed his eyes. He was right. She was right. He needed to hear it. I'm going to say some things that are in the letter, but I want to say them differently here, because in the letter, I was writing carefully. I was thinking about evidence and documentation and making sure the information was clear. This is different. This is just me talking to you. This is just us. A pause. He could hear in the pause the specific sound of a room he recognized. The study, the particular ambient silence of that room, with the door closed, the faint sound of the house around it. She had recorded this at her desk, in her study, the room where the book, with the instructions, had been on the shelf for 15 years. I want to tell you about the years. Her voice was steady, not the steadiness of someone suppressing emotion, but the steadiness of someone who had already moved through what needed to be moved through and was now on the other side, in the cleaner air. I want to tell you that they were good. Most of them, more than most of them. I want you to know that when I look at our lives, when I think about what we built together, what we made, I don't regret it. Not any of it. Not even the hard parts. Not even the parts that were harder than they needed to be. He thought about 22 years, the good years and the harder years, and the years that were both, simultaneously, the way years were, when you were actually living them, rather than looking back. You were a good husband. He exhaled. I need you to hear that. I've told you before, but I'm telling you again, because I want it to be the last thing I tell you, or one of the last things, before everything else. I need to say, you were good. You tried. You showed up. You loved Emma in a way that I've watched her absorb and carry forward. You can see it in her. Daniel, you can see what your love made her into, and I'm proud of you for that. I'm proud of us for that. He thought about Emma, 27 years old, at Franklin's office, reading carefully, managing herself carefully, the specific quality of her that came from somewhere he'd never been able to name. He could name it now. Now I need to tell you something harder. Her voice shifted slightly, not darker, more direct, the voice of someone arriving at the thing they'd been working toward. Your mother is not going to make this easy for you. Whatever I've left, the letter, this recording, the documents, if she finds them first, she'll try to stop you from receiving them. And if she doesn't find them first, if you find them before she can, she'll try to minimize what they mean. She'll say I was sick. She'll say I was afraid. She'll say I wasn't thinking clearly. A pause. I want you to know. I was afraid. I am afraid. But I'm thinking very clearly. Maybe more clearly than I have in years. Because there's a quality of attention that comes when you understand how much time you have, and it is less than you thought. He thought about Rachel at her desk, sick, afraid, thinking clearly, recording her voice into a small machine so that 15 years later, or whenever it was, her husband would be able to hear it. Here is what I want you to do. Her voice was steady again. The practical Rachel, the teacher, the woman who moved through difficult things by organizing them. I want you to deal with the trust. Get the attorney. Get what Emma was left. That's not optional. That's Gerald's gift to her, and she deserves to have it. Whatever it takes. I want you to be angry. For however long, you need to be angry. Don't let anyone tell you that you should get over it faster than you actually do. Take the time. And then, a longer pause. He held the recorder. He waited. And then I want you to put it down. Her voice was softer now. I've spent the last several months carrying the trust. Your mother's, the knowledge of it, the decision about what to do with the knowledge. And I want to tell you something I've learned from carrying it, asterisk. It's very heavy, and it belongs to her. It's your mother's weight. It is the consequence of her choices, and I don't want you to carry it the way I've been carrying it. Not for 15 years. Not for any years. Because it will do to you what it's been doing to me. So, the word was gentle, definitive. If your mother hid this from you, don't waste another 15 years carrying her guilt. That's mine to say, and hers to own, and yours to set down. Set it down, Daniel. He was crying. He hadn't known he was crying until he felt it. The specific, involuntary surrender of a man who had been holding something very tightly for a very long time and had just been given permission to stop holding it. I love you, asterisk, Rachel said. Simple, unhurried. The 3 words she had said to him 1,000 times, across kitchen tables, at the end of phone calls, in the dark of the bedroom, said now in the same voice, with the same weight, as though no time had passed between the last time and this time. I love Emma. Tell her I love her. Not that she doesn't know, but tell her again. From me. From this. A pause. Take care of yourself. Eat breakfast. You always skipped breakfast. He laughed. A broken, surprised sound. The laugh of a man who had not expected to laugh in this moment, and loved hers with the full, helpless force of someone who had just been reminded of exactly who she was. Happy anniversary, Daniel. Her voice, his name, the silence after it, was different from the silence before. Fuller, somehow, as though the recording had placed something in the room that had not been there before, and that would, he understood, remain. He sat with it. He sat for a long time. 1 year later, October the following year, the 27th anniversary, which was also the anniversary of finding the box, which was also the anniversary of understanding that 15 years had been both longer and shorter than he'd known. He and Emma's had spent the morning at the university, Northwestern, where Rachel had taught for 11 years before Emma was born, at a small ceremony in the English department, the Rachel Harper Scholarship for first-generation students, funded in part by the trust assets that had been recovered through 14 months of legal process, and in part by contributions from former students and colleagues who had been asked and had said yes, without hesitation, the yes of people who had been waiting for an occasion to say what they'd always known. Emma had spoken at the ceremony. She'd spoken well, her mother's clarity, her father's steadiness, and at the end, she'd said, "My mother believed that the best thing you could do with the truth was pass it forward. This scholarship is us doing that." He had stood beside her and had not trusted his voice enough to speak. He didn't need to speak. Emma knew. He went to the cemetery in the afternoon. Alone, Emma had offered to come, and he'd said he wanted an hour by himself first, and she'd understood, which she always did. The cemetery on Elm Hill was exactly as it had always been. The same paths, the same trees, the same specific quality of quiet that cemeteries had. That wasn't silence exactly, but something adjacent to it. The quiet of a place that had agreed to hold things. He walked the familiar paths to Rachel's stone. He'd walked it every anniversary for 15 years. He knew every turn. He knew the particular angle at which the afternoon light fell across her name. In October, he stood at the stone. He put the flowers down, the same flowers, the corner shop, the ones he'd brought every year, and he put the card down beside them. He'd written it the night before. Not a long card. He'd never written long cards. That had been Rachel's territory. But the things he needed to say, in the specific year that this one had been. He stood for a moment. He thought about what the year had held. Franklin's office, his mother's kitchen, the recorder, the scholarship, Emma's voice at a podium. He thought about what 15 years had held. The grief, the managing, the reconstruction, all of it carried. Without the truth, without the last thing she'd wanted him to have. He thought about what she'd said it down. He thought about whether he had. He was working on it. He was working on it. In the way you worked on things that were genuinely hard. Not in a straight line, not on a schedule, but consistently, with the understanding that the working on it was itself the thing, was itself the point. He would call his mother when he was ready. He didn't know when that would be. He knew it would be. He looked at the stone, Rachel Ellen Harper, beloved wife and mother, and he thought about her voice. In the room, he thought about her saying, "Take care of yourself. You always skipped breakfast." He thought about the specific ordinary love of a person who knew you well enough to know the small things, who knew you'd skip breakfast, who knew you'd need to hear the voice and not just read the words, who knew that the best thing she could leave you was not the money or the documents or even the truth, but the knowledge that she had seen you clearly and had loved you anyway. That had always been the inheritance. He'd just been waiting 15 years to receive it. He looked at the stone. For a long time, the afternoon light was doing what it did in October, going golden, going long, the specific warmth of a season in the middle, of letting go. He thought about Rachel. He thought about what she had given him from the other side of 15 years. The letter, the voice, the permission to put down what wasn't his to carry. He thought about the life still ahead of him. Emma at the podium, students receiving scholarships, mornings with breakfast, the ordinary future of a man who had been handed back the truth of his own history and could now build forward with the real version. He looked at the headstone. He felt, for the first time, not the absence of grief. Grief didn't work that way. Grief wasn't a thing you arrived past, but something alongside it, something that had not been there before. He smiled, a small smile, the private kind, the kind you didn't perform for anyone, the smile of a man who had finally heard what he needed to hear and knew, standing in the October light, with flowers on a grave, and 15 years behind him, and the rest of his life in front of him, that she had meant it. Every word. She had meant it. Happy anniversary, Daniel. He stayed until the light changed. Then he walked back to where Emma was waiting at the gate, coffee in hand, her mother's eyes, her father's patience, and they drove home together through the October afternoon. That was, for the first time in 15 years, enough